most of you are focused maybe at the technical level out in the field. So I'm going to talk about something completely different today. And it's the success Helen has with new employee training. When we started new employee training, we're really talking about embedding something about the culture and the overall standards of your organization. And so Helen approached me and said, would you like to do a webinar on the emergency preparedness, personal security aspect of becoming a district employee? And of course I said yes. That may have been the only mistake I've made so far, but if I can get the slide to go. Pictures say a lot of words, but the most important thing I have at the top of the slide is that we were doing this to try to be cost effective, save the employees time, and increase the participation of them understanding the EBMUD culture and the standards. So employees, new employees in particular, they have lots of questions. I think you would say about your organization that you probably answered every question. Honestly, if you think about it, in EBMUD, most of the answers are already there. But when you're a new employee, you're trying to match the question up with the answer. And how do you do that? How do you embed some of that culture in there? So we decided to take a webinar approach to it, just one of the several tools that Helen has been bringing into the district, and we're really sort of multi-media approach to the thing. So webinar was just one stab at it. All of us here, or most of us here, are probably disaster service workers, right? How do you take the idea of being a disaster service worker, that oath that people take when they join EBMUD, how do you translate that into you don't work for Kmart? This means certain things. This is the district's culture. We overcommit. We over-activate. We're going to expect you to be there on a bad day, as we call it. So the webinar is able to bring that approach across really well. I had a couple other pictures, but Helen didn't want me to use all of them, so she only put this one up there. So this one up here describes what? What do you think about that picture? All right. Well, that's a guy named Flacco who lives out in Lafayette and likes to tag our reservoirs. All right. And so we wanted to take the approach to district employees and say critical infrastructure is important. We want you to pay attention to it, maintain it, and report if something's not going well. Here's a picture of a camera that we set up to capture the guy. And we showed that we took him to court, and his family paid about $15,000 in restitution to the district. That talks about those little things, right? That's the whole idea of fixing the potholes in New York City, fix New York City, if you understand that background. We wanted to transmit some of those standards along. So you get this thing started, and then several people said talk about management buy-in. So Helen took the exact opposite approach. We don't need a lot of management buy-in to get all these things set up. We're simply going to do a webinar every month. Hey, Steve, can you make the webinar? No, you're busy today. Great, make it next month. All right? So we took away all that stress of trying to get people to one location, orchestrate the big event. All of a sudden, Sullivan's sick that day. Who's the backup guy for him? Took all that away. Just took all that management stress away, and you got the employees buying into the webinar. So what I do is I interact with them before the webinar, I interact during the webinar, you can ask the questions and polling, and I see them afterwards. So it's that continuum, and it's that kind of motivation. How many people here saw the movie Cable Guy? About half, a little less than half. So if you know that whole funny story about the cable guy, I like a lot of humor, you've got to have the cable guy to run a webinar. This idea that, oh, well, everybody's perfect, everybody can make everything happy, and everybody's entirely understanding between YouTube and iPhones and this, that ain't true, and you know that, because when someone jams you up and says, would you do the webinar tomorrow? That kind of thing. So you do have to figure out the roles and responsibilities, and Helen put that into the program and put a management structure in place to make sure that certain gates are met and things are designed on a regular basis that eases the burden of actually doing this particular webinar. Some lesson learned: expect failure. All right, I kind of actually enjoy the idea of a little bit of fear every day before I start a webinar, because it makes me think, what's going to go wrong? What do I need to think about? So like the power going out, that's not a good thing. That's happened to me. The WebEx server crashing, that wasn't a good thing, but that's happened to me. People being able to listen but not see the slides because of some sort of problem in an upload to a particular software patch that didn't quite go well. All those kind of things have happened to me. So that whole idea of degrading gracefully, when you're under the sweat, a light coat of sweat is on your forehead, and the people listening to you can hear it. If you're in that situation, you have a good chance of losing your audience. So trying to come up with all those default mechanisms so that if one person's not on the WebEx and 6 are, you can kind of bring that person in through some other portal. I've had to figure that out so that I can get to the point where everybody would interact. I don't look like Brad Pitt, all right? So most people think they're perfect, all right? And so you have to find somebody who's going to be honest enough to say, hey, Ed, that webinar is really not that good, or that picture's not that great, or you think that funny story is really not that funny. All right, and so I use participants' feedback and I use a bunch of other people's feedback together. I'm glad some of you are laughing because you too thought you were Brad Pitt when you came into the room today, whatever. You know, it just doesn't work that way. You know, so feeding that, get that feedback going is useful. Also, how many people have been to a webinar when you look at it and it's dated 2011? You've instantly turned off because there's no currency there. In today's multimedia 5 nanosecond speed of information, if you're not maintaining your webinar, if you're not investing in that, then that thing's gone. All right, so like the one thing I always tell everybody is put their telephone on mute or the Skype on mute, because I hate to hear their multitasking in the background because they've tuned me out. And if you think they haven't tuned you out, some of you are already multitasking in the back there, so you know it's like someone's got nothing to say. All right, so you just have to figure that in. And so I constantly try to refresh. At least every other month I'm doing something different to bring in, or I've got the latest statistic or whatever. All right, so like, you know, last year we had 5 vehicles stolen, 2 at gunpoint in EBMUD. That captures people's attention when you want to talk to them about safety. You throw the little story out there. And then I also interact with them. I actually put people on the spot and tell them ahead of time in the webinar they're responsible for slide 14. What's slide 14? You know, so they're prepared to have to interact with you. So the last thing I guess I would say that Helen has done is to make sure that it is part of an overall program. So it really works at embedding, as I said, a bit of the district's overall standards and culture.